Bassingbourn Airfield, England, June 1983. A reunion of men who weren't supposed to survive. The wind moved through the old hangar like a whisper from 1944, carrying the smell of rain and rust. Inside, beneath exposed steel beams and peeling paint, 70 men gathered around folding tables covered with photographs, dog tags, and memories that still woke them at night. Most were in their 60s now, hair gray or gone hands spotted with age. But their eyes held something younger, something that never grew old. Michael Mercer stood at the edge of the crowd feeling out of place. 25 years old, United States Marine Corps dress blues sharp against the faded civies of the veterans around him. He'd flown from Camp Lejeune to England on a hunch following a letter that arrived 3 weeks earlier. An invitation. A request. Come hear about your grandfather. Come learn what they never told you. He moved through the crowd, scanning the photographs on tables. Young men in coveralls standing beside tanks with names painted on hulls. Iron Duke, Hell on Wheels, Lucky Strike, boys with cigarettes and 1,000-yard stares. Then he saw it. A photo half hidden beneath others. 4 men in front of a Sherman tank, arms around each other's shoulders. The tank's name read Iron Mule. One of the men, shorter than the others, had familiar eyes. Michael's eyes. That's your grandfather. Michael turned. An old man stood beside him. White hair, combed back eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a veteran's cap and a name tag that read, Gerald Hammond, 22nd Armored Battalion. You're the one who wrote me, Michael said. Hammond nodded. I promised myself if I lived long enough I'd find you. Tell you what really happened. He gestured toward a corner where 3 other men sat at a separate table away from the crowd. Come on, someone you need to meet. At the corner table, 2 men stood as Michael approached. One was tall and thin-faced, weathered like old leather. The other was stocky hands, thick with calluses even after 40 years. Michael Mercer, Hammond said, meet Ray Hoskins and Frank DeLuca, your grandfather's crew. Ray extended a hand. His grip was firm, but his fingers trembled. You look like him. Same eyes, same stubborn chin. His voice caught. You even stand like him. Frank didn't shake hands. He just stared, lips pressed tight, then nodded once. Sit down, kid. You need to hear this. Michael sat. The 3 veterans remained standing for a moment as if gathering strength, then lowered themselves into chairs that creaked under old weight. Your family never told you about Tommy, did they? Ray said. Just that he died in Normandy, June 6th, 1944. That's all I know. That's all anyone knows, Frank said bitterly. That's all they wanted anyone to know. He pulled something from his jacket. A small wooden box, edges worn smooth by decades of handling. He set it on the table. This belonged to your grandfather. We kept it for you. Michael's hand hovered over the box but didn't open it. What's inside? The truth, Hammond said. A silver star they gave him after he was dead. A letter he wrote the night before he saved our lives. And a story the Army spent 40 years trying to erase. Ray leaned forward. Your grandfather killed 2 Tiger tanks in 10 minutes. 1 Sherman crew, 2 Tigers. You understand what that means. Michael nodded slowly. He'd studied armor in training. Tigers were monsters. 57 tons of German engineering wrapped in armor that laughed at Sherman shells. The kill ratio had been brutal. 5 Shermans lost for every Tiger destroyed. Sometimes worse. It's impossible, Michael said. Yeah, Frank said. That's what everyone thought. That's why they tried to forget him. He tapped the box. But we didn't forget. Because he did it by going backward. Michael blinked. I'm sorry, what? Backward, Ray repeated. He fought the most feared tank in history by putting his Sherman in reverse. And for that, they called him a coward. The hangar seemed to grow quieter. Michael looked at the three old men searching their faces for a joke. He found only grief and pride mixed together like scar tissue. I don't understand, Michael said. Neither did we, Hammond said. Not at first, but Tommy did. And in 8 minutes on June 6, 1944, he changed how America fights wars. They just never gave him credit for it. Ray pulled out a folder thick with papers and spread a yellowed map across the table. It showed hedgerow country south of Caumont marked with pencil notations, X marks for Sherman positions, arrows showing German movement, 2 spots circled in red labeled Tiger 1 and Tiger 2. This is where it happened, Ray said. We were pinned down here, tigers coming through this tree line. Tommy was driving, Frank was loading, I was on the gun, and we were about to die. Frank's jaw tightened. Red 5 got hit first, brewed up in 2 seconds. Just gone. We knew we were next. Captain Brennan was screaming over the radio, Ray continued. Advance and engage. Standard doctrine. Charge the enemy. He looked at Michael. Your grandfather didn't advance. He threw the Sherman into reverse. We thought he'd lost his mind, Frank said. I was screaming at him. Ray was screaming, but Tommy didn't say a word. Just backed that tank down a slope like he'd practiced it 1,000 times. He had practiced it, Hammond said. That's what none of us knew. Tommy had been practicing reverse maneuvers since basic training. While the rest of us were learning to charge forward, Tommy was learning to go backward. And they mocked him for it, called him Backtrack Tommy, said he was yellow. Ray's hands formed fists on the table. He wasn't yellow. He was a goddamn genius. He backed us into a position where the Tiger had to expose its rear armor to track us. Then he stopped, perfectly calm, and told me to take the shot. Did you hit it? Michael asked. Blew the goddamn turret off, Ray said. 1 shot. Clean through the rear plate. The Tiger cooked off so hard the explosion knocked trees down. He paused, swallowing hard. Commandant's name was Klaus Hoffmann. We found German records after the war. 17 kills. Never lost a tank. Tommy made him number 18. Michael tried to process what he was hearing. His grandfather had killed a Tiger tank, had outsmarted one of Germany's best. Then we had to do it again, Frank said quietly. The 3 veterans fell silent. Michael waited, sensing the worst part was coming. There was a second Tiger, Ray finally said. Valley Road, hitting a Canadian column. Brennan asked Tommy if he could do it again, and your grandfather looked at the map and said, yes. Except this time the Germans knew, Hammond added. The second Tiger's commander was Oberleutnant Friedrich Weber. He'd heard about Hoffmann. He knew someone was using backward tactics, so he was ready. Frank's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Tommy got him anyway. Same tactic, same impossible geometry, but it cost him everything. Michael's throat felt tight. How did he die? Artillery, Ray said. Random shell. German gunners firing blind. Hit near our tank after we'd killed the second Tiger. Shrapnel got Tommy in the side. He bled out in 3 minutes. The box sat between them, carrying weight that had nothing to do with wood and metal. Open it, Frank said. Michael's hands shook as he lifted the lid. Inside, nested in faded velvet, lay a silver star medal. Beneath it, wrapped in yellowed plastic, was a letter. The paper was stained dark brown along one edge. Blood. Read it, Ray said. Michael carefully unfolded the plastic, then the letter. The handwriting was neat practiced. "Mom," it began. "They call me Backtrack Tommy. Say I'm yellow because I practice driving in reverse. Maybe they're right. But I watched Jimmy Cortez burn alive because his driver panicked and went straight into a tiger's sights. I won't let that happen to my boys. If reversing means Frank and Ray come home, I'll wear that name forever. Your son, Tommy." Michael set the letter down carefully. He looked at Ray, and Frank saw tears on both their weathered faces. "This letter was in his pocket when he died," Frank said. "He never mailed it. We kept it for 40 years, waiting for someone in his family to ask what really happened." "Why didn't anyone tell us?" Michael's voice cracked. Hammond leaned back. "Because your grandfather disobeyed direct orders. Because his tactics worked, and that meant everything they'd been teaching was wrong." He gestured at the box. "They gave him the silver star to make it official, but they never wrote his name in field manuals, never taught what he did at Fort Knox." "The story spread anyway," Ray said. "Tank crews heard about it, started practicing reverse drills. By August of 1944, half the Shermans in France were using Tommy's tactics, unofficially, because it kept them alive." Frank added, "German reports mentioned it. They thought they were being ambushed by multiple tanks because they couldn't believe one Sherman could do what Tommy did." "He didn't just kill 2 tigers," Hammond said. "He changed the war, made the Germans scared, made them hesitate." He tapped the silver star. "And all he got was a medal they gave to his mother at a funeral." Michael sat in silence, holding a letter stained with his grandfather's blood. Around them, the reunion continued. Veterans laughed and drank and remembered. But at this table, 4 men sat with a truth that had waited 40 years. "There's more," Ray said, pushing the folder toward Michael, "if you want to know the whole story." Michael looked at the folder thick with documents and photographs. He thought about his family, about his mother who'd never spoken his grandfather's name without sadness, about the empty space in their history. "Tell me," Michael said. "Tell me everything." Ray nodded slowly, glanced at Frank and Hammond, then took a deep breath. "It started in the hedgerows of Normandy, June 6, 1944, 3:47 in the afternoon. And to understand what Tommy did, you need to understand what was coming for us." He pulled out a photograph. A Sherman tank covered in mud, 3 men beside it. One of them, shorter than the others, had his hand on the barrel of the main gun. His expression was serious, almost sad. "That's Tommy," Ray said. 2 hours before the first tiger, 2 hours before everything changed. Normandy, France, June 6th, 1944, 3:47 p.m. The smell hit first, burning rubber mixed with copper, diesel fuel and something worse, something organic that made Frank's stomach turn. The inside of the Sherman stank of sweat and hot metal and fear so thick you could taste it. Tommy Mercer's hands were wrapped tight around the gear shift knuckles, white through the grime. 22 years old. Farm kid from Cedar Falls, Iowa. The smallest man in the crew. The quietest. The one they'd called a coward for 6 months. The hedgerows closed in on both sides like prison walls. Ancient stone foundations, thick as a man's body, topped with centuries of roots and brambles. Visibility was maybe 30 feet through the smoke. The radio crackled. "Red 5 is hit. Red 5 is burning." Tommy had seen it. The Sherman on their left had been rolling forward when the world turned white. The turret flipped end over end, landed 20 feet away. The men inside never screamed. Frank was loading shells with shaking hands. That wasn't artillery. That was direct fire. Then they heard it. Low, rhythmic, mechanical, like a locomotive breathing through iron lungs. The Maybach HL-230 engine, 57 tons of German engineering. Tiger. Captain Brennan's voice exploded over the radio. All units advance and engage. Do not let them establish fire superiority, standard doctrine. The only doctrine, charge. Use speed and numbers. Accept casualties. Frank slammed a shell into the breach. Forward, Tommy, gun it. Ray cranked the turret. I can't get an angle. Move us forward. Tommy looked through the periscope. Smoke, fire, the burning wreck of Red 5. And there, just visible through the haze, the long barrel of an 88mm gun sweeping slowly left to right. He remembered his father's farm. The John Deere tractor. The narrow gap between the barn and the chicken coop. His father's voice. Tommy, anyone can drive forward. That's just gasoline and guts. But backing up, that's geometry. That's knowing every inch of ground behind you. He remembered Fort Riley. The other drivers learning to charge forward. Tommy staying late, practicing something different. Backing the Sherman through obstacles in the dark. Learning to read terrain in mirrors. He remembered the sergeants yelling. Mercer. You planning to win the war, driving backwards. He remembered the laughter. Backtrack Tommy, the coward. He remembered Jimmy Cortez, good kid from Sacramento. Died screaming when his driver panicked and charged straight into a panther's sights. 2 weeks ago, Tommy had watched it happen. Tommy looked in the rearview mirror. Behind them, the ground sloped down 15 degrees. It led into thicker trees obscured by smoke, cover, and more importantly, an angle. The Tiger fired. The shell screamed past their bow, missing by inches. The shockwave hit like a physical blow. Something cracked in the suspension. Move, Frank was screaming. Tommy, move. Captain Brennan on the radio. Iron Mule advance, goddammit. Tommy's hand moved to the gear shift. In his mind, he saw the terrain behind them, saw the slope, saw where the Tiger would have to move to track them, saw the moment when German armor would expose the weakest point. Rear hull, 82 millimeters, half the thickness of the front. His father's voice. The trick to reversing isn't looking back, it's knowing where you came from. Tommy made his decision. He didn't say a word, just moved the gear shift back, felt it click into reverse, and stomped the accelerator. The Sherman lurched backward. Frank fell against the breech. What the hell are you doing? Ray spun in his seat. Tommy, forward. Go forward. The tank gathered speed treads, tearing up earth as it reversed down the slope. The engine roared. Inside, everything not tied down went flying. Shell casings rolled. The cramped space filled with grinding metal. Tommy's eyes flicked between periscope and mirror. His hands made tiny corrections. Left tread slower. Right tread faster. Using Red 5's burning wreck as cover. Backing into the smoke like a ghost. The Tiger fired again. The shell hit where they'd been 2 seconds earlier. Shrapnel pinged harmlessly off their rear armor. Inside, the Tiger Commandant Klaus Hoffmann frowned. 34 years old. Veteran of Poland, France, Russia. 17 kills. Never lost a vehicle. He was the nightmare American tankers whispered about. Wo ist er? Where did he go? His gunner swept the main gun. Ich sehe ihn nicht. I don't see him. Forward. Slowly. Find him. The Tiger lurched forward, climbing the rise where the Sherman had been. Hoffman felt confident. Americans always retreated when they met a tiger. This was what tigers were built for. Hunting. Tommy brought the Sherman to a stop behind trees. The tank sat angled, hull tilted. Through the periscope, he watched the Tiger's barrel appear first, then the hull as it crept forward onto higher ground, following them. "Stop," Tommy said quietly. The first word he'd spoken in 2 minutes. The Sherman shuddered to a halt. Ray had stopped shouting. He was staring at Tommy, starting to understand. Frank stood frozen, watching Tommy's face. The concentration. The absolute focus. "Tommy," Ray said slowly, "tell me you see what I think you see." Tommy's eyes locked on the periscope. "Turret, 9 o'clock. Armor piercing, loaded, Frank whispered. The Tiger was fully exposed now. Hoffman was leaning out of his commander's hatch, scanning the terrain below. His tank had climbed the rise, angling to track where he thought his prey had gone. The Tiger's rear quarter faced Tommy's gun. 82 millimeters instead of 100. The weakest point on the most feared tank in the Wehrmacht. "Take the shot." Ray traversed the turret. The barrel swung 90 degrees smooth and fast. Crosshairs centered on the Tiger's rear hull, just below the turret ring. Range 200 yards. Angle perfect. Ray held his breath, squeezed the trigger. The world exploded. The cannon roared. The Sherman rocked backward. Smoke filled the interior, choking. The brass casing ejected with a clang. For 1 second, nobody could see. Nobody could breathe. Then the smoke cleared. The shell had flown true. Punched through 82 millimeters of steel and detonated inside the engine compartment. The initial explosion was small, a bright orange flash. Then the Tiger's ammunition cooked off. 40 rounds of 88 millimeter shells detonating in a chain reaction. The turret didn't just blow off, it launched. 50 tons of metal spinning through the air, trailing fire. It flew 20 feet up and crashed down 30 yards away with an impact that shook the ground. The hull burned. Flames shot from every hatch. Black smoke poured into the sky. Ammunition continued cooking off each detonation, sending shock waves through the wreckage. Hoffman never made it out. Neither did his crew. Dead instantly. Incinerated. Inside the Sherman, nobody moved. Ray's hand still on the trigger. Frank's mouth open. Tommy watching the Tiger burn. 17 kills. Never lost a tank. Until today. Finally, Frank spoke. "Did we just—" "Yeah," Ray whispered. The radio exploded with chatter, excitement, confusion, disbelief. "Who got it? Who killed the Tiger?" Captain Brennan's voice cut through sharp with shock. "Iron Mule report. What is your position?" Tommy keyed the radio voice calm. "Iron Mule to command. 1 Tiger destroyed. Engaged from rear quarter at 200 yards. Request permission to reposition." Silence. 5 seconds of static. Then Brennan's voice quieter now. "Say again, Iron Mule. Did you say you destroyed a Tiger?" "Affirmative, sir." Another pause. Tommy could hear voices in the background. Officers talking fast. "How?" Brennan finally asked. Tommy looked at Ray and Frank, both staring at him. Ray's face showed awe and terror. Frank looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Geometry, sir," Tommy said into the radio. "Just geometry." In the hangar at Bassingbourn, 1983, Ray looked at Michael across the table. The old man's eyes were wet, but he was smiling. "That's when they stopped calling him Backtrack Tommy," Ray said. "To what?" Michael asked. "The reverser," Frank said. "The man who fought the most feared tank in history by going backward." Hammond leaned forward. "But the story doesn't end there. Because in 20 minutes, he had to do it again. And the second time, the Germans were ready for him." The Tiger burned for 7 minutes before the ammunition stopped cooking off. By then, the smoke column was visible for miles, a black pillar rising into the gray Normandy sky. Inside the Sherman, nobody spoke. The three men sat breathing hard, hands trembling. The interior smelled like cordite and sweat, and something electric like air after lightning strikes. Ray pulled off his helmet, ran a hand through sweat-soaked hair, and laughed. Not a happy laugh. A sound between hysteria and disbelief. We killed a tiger. Holy Mary, Mother of God, we actually killed a tiger. Frank slumped against the hull. When you threw us into reverse, Tommy, I thought you'd lost your mind. Tommy sat motionless, staring through the periscope at the burning wreckage. His hands were still on the controls. Something in his eyes had changed. He'd done the impossible, and now everyone would expect him to do it again. The radio crackled. Captain Brennan's voice carried an edge Tommy had never heard before. Not quite anger, not quite respect. Iron Mule returned to Rally Point Baker. Copy, sir. But before Tommy could move, another voice cut through. Urgent. Panicked. Any unit, this is Maple 2-4. Taking heavy fire from German Armour Valley Road. Multiple casualties. Request immediate assistance. Maple 2-4. Canadian unit. Static. Then another voice, calmer but strained. Maple 2-4. This is Overwatch. We have no armor available in your sector. Recommend you withdraw. Negative Overwatch. We have wounded. Can't move them. That thing is tearing us apart. Maple 2-4. Identify hostile armor. A pause, then quiet and cold. Tiger. Ray looked at Tommy. Frank looked at Tommy. Neither said anything. Brennan's voice came back. Morrison, can you provide support? Lieutenant Morrison responded immediately. Negative, sir. We're engaged with infantry. Brennan cursed. Then reluctant, Iron Mule, what's your fuel status? Tommy checked the gauge. 3/4, sir. Ammunition, Frank counted. 18 armor, piercing 22 high explosive. Silence. Tommy could picture Brennan staring at a map doing mathematics that had nothing to do with numbers. 1 Sherman, 1 Tiger. 37 Canadian soldiers dying. Iron Mule, Brennan said slowly. Can you reach grid 773429? Tommy traced the route on his map. Valley Road. 2 miles northwest. 15 minutes. Affirmative, sir. Another pause. When Brennan spoke again, his voice was quieter, more human. Private Mercer, I'm not ordering you to engage. I'm asking, can you do it again? Tommy looked at the burning tiger, looked at Ray and Frank, his crew, his responsibility. He thought about the Canadians dying on Valley Road, thought about Jimmy Cortez burning because his driver made the wrong choice. Yes, sir, Tommy said. We can do it again. Frank's head snapped up. Tommy, we got lucky once. Lightning doesn't strike twice. Wasn't luck, Tommy said quietly. It was geometry, and geometry works every time. Ray checked his gun sight. The second one knows Tommy. They know someone's using backward tactics. I know, so they'll be watching for it. I know. Tommy engaged the clutch. Those Canadians don't have a choice. We do. He keyed the radio. Iron Mule to command, moving to support Maple 2-4. ETA 15 minutes. Acknowledged Iron Mule. Good hunting. The Sherman rumbled through hedgerows following narrow tracks. Tommy drove carefully, watching for soft ground, for ditches, for the 1,000 ways a tank could become trapped. Frank loaded shells, stacking them within reach. We can't use the same trick twice. Won't be the same, Tommy said. Different ground, different angles, but the principle stays the same. Which is, make them think we're prey, then show them we're the hunter. The sounds of battle grew louder. Small arms, fire mortars, and underneath the steady boom of a high-velocity gun. Ray peered through his sight. Smoke ahead. 300 yards. Tommy slowed brought them to a small rise. Below Valley Road stretched out like a scar. 3 Canadian vehicles burned. A half-track, a jeep, a carrier, all torn apart. Bodies lay scattered. Survivors had taken cover in an orchard pinned down. And there, 300 yards down the road, hull angled behind a stone farmhouse, was the Tiger. Even at this distance it looked monstrous. The long barrel tracked back and forth. The commander's cupola was closed. Whoever was inside had learned to be careful. "Jesus," Frank whispered. Tommy studied the terrain. The valley road ran north to south. The Tiger sat at the southern end using the farmhouse for cover. The orchard where Canadians were pinned sat to the west. To the east, a tree line thick enough to hide a Sherman. Ray markings. Turret number 217. White cross on the hull. Tommy's mind raced. Inside that Tiger was a crew who'd heard about Hoffman. They'd be alert, paranoid, checking their six constantly. He pulled out his notebook. Sketches of German tanks, weak points. He pointed to his drawing. Here, lower rear hull, left side. Fuel tanks. Armor's only 60 millimeters. If we get an angle, the fuel does the rest. If, Frank said. Big if. Only if we've got. Tommy folded the notebook. We circle through this tree line, come from the east, but we're not going backward this time. Ray blinked. We're not. No. We make them think we're doing standard flanking. Make them pivot. And when they rotate, we'll already be repositioning. The plan was insane, but charging a Tiger head-on was insane too. Everybody clear? Tommy asked. Clear as mud, Frank said. Good. If this goes wrong, if I say bail out, you bail. No arguments. Understood? Yeah, Ray said finally. Frank nodded. Then let's go kill a Tiger. The Sherman moved forward, engine muffled by trees. Every few yards, Tommy stopped, checked angles, calculated distance. 300 yards became 250. 250 became 200. The Tiger fired again. Another Canadian position exploded. Tommy heard screaming on the radio. Maple 2-4 to any unit. We can't hold. We need help now. Tommy keyed his radio. Maple 2-4, this is Iron Mule. Moving into position. Keep their attention for 30 seconds. Iron Mule. You're one tank. That's a Tiger. I know. Just keep shooting. Make noise. Are you insane? Maybe Tommy thought. 30 seconds, Tommy repeated. Then get your heads down. Inside the Tiger, Oberleutnant Friedrich Weber was having a bad day. He'd started confident, expecting easy kills. Then the radio report. Hoffman dead. Tiger destroyed by a Sherman using unorthodox tactics. Hoffman, the man who taught Weber everything, dead. Weber had ordered maximum alertness. Check every angle. Watch the rear. If you see a Sherman, kill it before it maneuvers. His gunner Scharf was good. His loader Kraus was fast. They would not make Hoffman's mistake. Herr Oberleutnant, Scharf said. Sherman, 3 o'clock, range 200 meters. Weber swung his periscope right. A Sherman emerging from tree line, moving at an angle. Bold, stupid, or was it traverse right? Load armor piercing, traversing, loaded. The turret swung, crosshairs centered on the Sherman's hull. Easy shot. Then Weber hesitated. The Sherman wasn't hiding, wasn't backing up, just sitting there exposed, like bait. Herr Oberleutnant, Scharf's finger was on the trigger. Fire! Weber's mind raced. If this was bait, where was the trap behind us? 9 driver, reverse gunner, traverse rear, Schnell. The Tiger lurched backward, turret rotating to cover 6 o'clock. Weber's heart pounded. The Sherman that killed Hoffman attacked from behind. But when the turret completed rotation, the rear arc was empty. Nothing but field and distant trees. Weber's blood ran cold. Front traverse front. But Tommy had already moved. The moment the Tiger's turret started rotating away, he'd thrown the Sherman into reverse, backing into a shallow depression they'd passed 30 seconds earlier. A fold in ground barely 4 feet deep. Enough to hide the hull. Enough to create an angle. The Tiger's turret was still turning when Ray took the shot. The 75mm cannon roared. The Sherman rocked backward from recoil. Smoke filled the interior, choking and dense. For 2 seconds, nobody could see anything. Then the smoke cleared. The shell had struck low exactly where Tommy had drawn in his notebook. Lower rear hull left side. The armor-piercing round punched through 60 millimeters of steel and detonated inside the fuel compartment. The initial explosion was small, a bright flash of orange. Then the fuel ignited. It didn't explode like ammunition. It burned. Fast and hot and hungry. Flames erupted from the engine deck, from every seam and rivet. Black smoke poured into the sky. Inside the Tiger, the temperature rose to 1,000 degrees in seconds. Weber's last thought was simple. A single word whispered into smoke and fire. Hoffman. Then nothing. The Tiger's crew had 3 seconds to react. The driver gunned the engine, the loader reached for the hatch. The gunner froze, staring at fire climbing the walls. None of them made it out. The Tiger burned differently than the first one. No massive ammunition explosion. Just fire relentless and consuming. The flames reflected off the stone farmhouse, casting shadows across the valley road. Inside, the Sherman Ray sat with his hand still on the trigger. "Did we?" "Yeah," Frank whispered. Tommy watched the Tiger burn, his face illuminated by orange light. 2 Tigers. 8 minutes. Geometry and luck that shouldn't have held twice, but did. The radio erupted with voices. Maple 2-4 Canadians screaming with relief. "The Tiger's burning. The Tiger's down." "Who got it?" "Iron Mule. Same crew that got the first one." Captain Brennan's voice cut through. "Iron Mule confirms status." Tommy keyed the mic. His voice came out steady flat. "Iron Mule to command. Second Tiger destroyed. Engaged from concealed position. Target is burning. Maple 2-4 is clear." Silence. 10 seconds of static. Then Brennan spoke, voice different than Tommy had ever heard it. Quiet. Almost reverent. "Iron Mule returned to Rally Point Baker. And Mercer, that's 2 Tigers in 10 minutes. I don't know what to say, except thank you." Another voice came over the radio. A Canadian officer, call sign Maple Actual. "Iron Mule, this is Major Douglas 2nd Canadian Armored. I watched what you just did. I've been fighting tanks since North Africa, and I've never seen anything like it. You saved 37 of my men. What's your name, son?" Tommy hesitated. "Private Thomas Mercer, sir. 22nd Armored Battalion." "Private Mercer, if I ever meet you in person, the first round's on me." You hear, "Yes, sir." Other voices filled the radio units across the sector who'd heard the reports. 2 Tigers, 1 Sherman. Impossible odds overcome twice. And then, cutting through the chatter, a single artillery shell fell from the sky. It wasn't aimed. Just a random round from a German battery 5 miles away, firing blind. 1 shell among hundreds. Bad luck. Wrong place. Wrong time. It landed 8 feet from the Sherman's left side. The blast wave hit like a freight train. The tank lifted, tilted, crashed back down. Metal screamed. Inside, the crew was thrown against steel. Tommy's head slammed into the viewport. The world turned white, then red, then gray. He felt warmth spreading across his left side. Something wet. He looked down. A jagged piece of shrapnel, maybe 6 inches long, protruded from his side just below the ribs. His uniform was already dark with blood. Too much blood. Tommy. Frank's voice, distant and echoing. Tommy, you're hit? Ray was beside him, hands pressing against the wound. Jesus Christ. We need a medic, now. Tommy tried to speak, but his mouth wouldn't work right. He tasted copper. His vision was narrowing darkness creeping in from the edges. He knew what this meant. He'd seen enough men die to recognize his own death approaching. His hand fumbled for the radio. He keyed the mic. His voice came out, thin, rasping. Iron Mule to Maple Actual. Valley Road is clear. Get your boys out. Get them home. Iron Mule, what's your status? Brennan alarm cutting through his voice. Tommy's hand slipped from the radio. He looked at Frank, at Ray, his crew, his boys. Did they get through? Frank was crying. Yeah, Tommy. They're safe. All of them. Because of you. Tommy tried to smile. Good. That's good. Ray pressed harder on the wound, but the blood kept coming. Stay with us, Tommy. Medics are coming. Just hold on. But Tommy was already somewhere else. He saw the farm in Iowa, saw his father teaching him to back the tractor, saw his mother baking bread, saw the wheat fields stretching to the horizon golden in summer sun. He thought about the letter in his pocket, the one about being called a coward. He hoped his mother would understand, hoped she'd know he hadn't backed down. He'd just backed them up. His vision was fading darkness closing in, but he could still see Ray and Frank, their faces hovering over him. Don't be scared, Tommy whispered, so quiet they had to lean close. Don't be scared to back up. Sometimes that's the only way forward. Frank grabbed his hand, squeezed tight. We won't forget, Tommy. I swear to God, we won't forget. But Tommy didn't hear him. His eyes had closed. His breathing, shallow and labored, slowed, then stopped. The Sherman sat in the shallow depression engine idling. Inside, 2 men held their friend and wept. Outside, 2 tigers burned monuments to a farm kid from Iowa who'd fought the war backward and won. In the hangar at Bassingbourn, 1983, Ray finished the story. His voice was hoarse. His eyes were wet. Across the table, Michael sat frozen, his grandfather's letter still in his hands. We stayed with him for 20 minutes, Ray said quietly. Until the medics came. Until they took him away. Then we had to keep fighting. But we never forgot what he taught us. Frank nodded. Every time I got in a tank after that day, I checked my 6. I practiced backing up, because Tommy showed us the rulebook doesn't always have the right answers. Hammond leaned forward. Your grandfather saved our lives, Michael. Mine raised Frank's, and 37 Canadians. But more than that, he changed how we fought. Within a month, half the tank crews in Normandy were practicing reverser tactics. Not officially, but they did it anyway. The Germans noticed, Ray added. We found after action reports after the war. They started checking their 6 constantly. It slowed them down, made them cautious, made them scared. One man did that, Frank said. One farm kid they called a coward changed the whole goddamn war. And the army never gave him credit. Michael looked at the silver star in the box, at the letter stained with his grandfather's blood, at 3 old men who'd carried this story for 40 years. Why tell me this now? Ray glanced at Frank and Hammond. Because we're old. Because we won't be around much longer. And because someone in your family needs to know that Thomas Mercer wasn't just another casualty. He was a man who saw the world different, who had the guts to trust what he saw. And because, Hammond said. "The world needs to remember that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is break the rules, not from cowardice, but because you've seen a better way." Michael carefully folded the letter, placed it back in the box. His hands were steady, but his eyes were bright. "Thank you," he said, "for keeping this, for remembering him." Frank reached across the table, gripped Michael's shoulder. "You look like him. Maybe you think like him too. And if you do, don't ever let anyone call you a coward for seeing things different. Your grandfather taught us that cowards charge forward when they should back up. Brave men do what works." Outside the hangar, rain began to fall. Inside, 4 men sat with a truth that had waited decades to be spoken. A truth about geometry and courage and one man's refusal to die the way everyone expected. Thomas Mercer died on June 6, 1944, in a shallow depression beside Valley Road in Normandy. But his lesson lived on, whispered from crew to crew, taught without manuals, practiced without permission. Don't be scared to back up. Sometimes that's the only way forward. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is reverse the odds. The promise Ray and Frank made in that French cemetery held for 39 years. Through the rest of the war, they told Tommy's story to every tanker who would listen. Some dismissed it as exaggeration. Others listened, carefully asked questions about angles and terrain and timing. In September 1944, a technical sergeant named William Cross heard the story from Ray during a supply stop near Aachen. "You're saying he used the terrain to create the angle, not the gun." "Exactly," Ray said. "Tommy always said geometry beats firepower." Cross incorporated the concept into his unit's tactics. Over the next 4 months, his tank destroyers accounted for 11 German armor kills with only 2 losses. Frank survived the war and returned to Brooklyn. He worked construction, got married, had 3 daughters. But every Veterans Day, he told the story. "I'm alive because of a farm kid from Iowa who everyone called a coward," Frank would say. "He taught me that courage isn't about charging forward. It's about doing what works even when everyone says you're wrong." Ray became a high school teacher in California. Every year when his classes reached World War II, he told them about Tommy Mercer. "Your textbooks won't mention him," Ray told his students in 1967. "The Army tried to forget him because he broke their rules. But the soldiers remembered." In 1981, the National Archives began declassifying World War II reports. A researcher named David Chen found Captain Brennan's original field report from June 6, 1944. It described how Private Thomas Mercer had destroyed 2 Tigers using unorthodox reverse positioning tactics. Chen published his findings in a military history journal. Only 400 copies were printed, but one reached Gerald Hammond, the Canadian veteran who'd been saved on Valley Road. Hammond had spent decades trying to find out who'd saved his unit. He'd written letters to the Army to veterans organizations. Most went unanswered. But Chen's article had a name: Thomas Mercer, Cedar Falls, Iowa. Hammond hired a researcher to find Mercer's family. It took 8 months, but they found a grandson, Michael Mercer, United States Marine Corps. Hammond wrote the letter that brought Michael to Bassingbourn, the letter that led to Ray and Frank telling the story one more time. Now, sitting in that hangar in 1983, Ray felt something loosen in his chest, a weight he'd carried for 4 decades. "There's one more thing," Ray said. He pulled a worn notebook from his jacket. Tommy's notebook, the one filled with sketches of German tanks, calculations, diagrams. "We kept this," Ray said, handing it to Michael. "Everything your grandfather figured out, it's in here. We tried to get the Army to look at it. They said it was too unconventional. Michael opened the notebook carefully. Pages yellowed, pencil marks faded but legible. Sketch after sketch of tigers, panthers, Mark IVs, each annotated with weak points firing angles. One page showed a simple diagram, a Sherman behind a slope, a tiger advancing uphill a single line of fire in red. Beneath it, Tommy had written, "The trick isn't beating their armor. It's making them show you where the armor is weakest." "This is incredible," Michael said softly. "This is tactical doctrine written by a private." "Written by a private who was smarter than most generals," Frank corrected. Hammond leaned forward. "After the war, I spent 20 years in the Canadian Army, made colonel. I taught armor tactics, and every time I taught about engaging superior armor, I thought about that day." He paused. "I told that story to hundreds of officers. Never knew the man's name until last year." "How many lives did his tactics save?" Michael asked. Ray and Frank exchanged glances. "We've tried to calculate that," Ray said, "based on after-action reports survival rates. Between June 1944 and May 1945, Sherman crews using reverse positioning tactics had a 30% better survival rate. 30% of roughly 4,000 crewmen." Frank added, "That's about 1,200 men who probably lived because your grandfather showed them a better way." Michael sat back overwhelmed. 1,200 lives. And the Army never acknowledged him. "They gave him the Silver Star," Hammond said. "But they didn't teach his lessons. Military institutions don't like being taught by privates." "But we remembered," Ray said firmly. "Every reunion, every time someone asked. We kept the promise we made at his grave." Michael looked at the three old men. "I need to go there, to France, to where he died." "We thought you might," Frank said. He pulled out a paper with an address. "That's the cemetery where he was buried. They moved him later, but there's a marker at the original site. Local families maintained it." "Will you come with me?" Michael asked. Ray spoke for all of them. "We've been waiting 40 years to go back." 2 weeks later, 4 men stood in a field outside Saint-Laurent-sur-Mer. The temporary cemetery was gone, returned to farmland, but someone had placed a stone marker where Tommy's grave had been. "Here rested Private Thomas Mercer, 22nd Armored Battalion, United States Army. June 6, 1944. He fought backward and saved lives forward." Below in French, "Les villageois se souviennent." The villagers remember. Michael knelt, placed the silver star on the stone. "I'm sorry I never knew you, Grandpa." Ray placed a hand on Michael's shoulder. "He wouldn't hold it against you. Tommy just wanted to do the job and bring his crew home." "He did more than that," Hammond said. "He changed how we fought. He saved my life and 36 others. And he saved hundreds more by showing them that thinking different isn't cowardice. It's courage." Frank poured whiskey on the ground beside the marker. "For Tommy, the best goddamn driver the Army ever had." They stood in silence as the sun set over Normandy. Finally, Michael spoke. "How do we make sure he's remembered?" "We keep telling the story," Ray said. "We write it down. We make sure it gets into the archives, the history books. And we teach the lesson," Hammond added, "that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is question authority. Trust your own judgment when everyone else says you're wrong." "Because that's what Tommy did," Frank said. "And it cost him his life, but it saved ours." Michael held the silver star to the fading light. "I promise you I'll make sure people know. I'll make sure his name isn't forgotten." Ray smiled. "Then we kept our promise. 40 years later, but we kept it. They walked back as darkness fell. Behind them, the stone marker stood silent, watch over ground consecrated by sacrifice, by courage, by one man's refusal to do things the way everyone else did. In 2001, the U.S. Army Armor School at Fort Knox added a section to their tactical manual, Reverse Positioning in Armored Warfare. It never mentioned Thomas Mercer by name, but the techniques were his. In 2004, a military historian published a book, The Reverser: How One Private Changed Tank Warfare. It became required reading at West Point. In 2014, on the 70th anniversary of D-Day, the French village held a ceremony at the stone marker. A general from the U.S. Army read Tommy's letter to his mother, the one about being called a coward. When he finished, an old man stood up, 92 years old, voice clear. I am Jacques Moreau. In 1944, I was 8 years old. I watched from my father's barn as the American tank fought 2 German monsters. I watched it win. He paused, wiping his eyes. For 70 years, I wondered who was inside that tank. Now I know. And I will tell my grandchildren that heroes sometimes fight backward. Michael Mercer, now 56, retired Marine Lieutenant Colonel, stood beside his grandfather's marker and thought about courage, about geometry, about one farm kid who'd seen the world different and had the guts to trust what he saw. The words on the stone were simple, but they carried a truth that had waited 70 years to be understood. He fought backward and saved lives forward. Sometimes that's what heroism looks like. Not a charge into enemy fire, but the wisdom to know when to step back, when to reposition, when to trust that the unconventional path is the right one. Sometimes courage is reversing the odds, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to do what everyone expects and do what works instead. Thomas Mercer understood that, and in 10 minutes on a French hillside in 1944, he proved it. The world took 40 years to learn his name, but once they learned it, they never forgot. Michael returned to the United States 3 days later. He flew straight to Iowa, to the small house in Cedar Falls, where his mother still lived. He found her in the kitchen, the same kitchen where Tommy's mother had baked bread 70 years earlier. Michael placed the wooden box on the table between them. "Mom," he said quietly, "I need to tell you about your father." She looked at the silver star, at the blood-stained letter, and her hands began to shake. "Where did you get this?" "From the men he saved. From the promise they kept for 40 years. Michael told her everything. About the tigers, about the geometry, about the letter Tommy had written the night before he died, the letter that said he wasn't a coward, just a man who refused to let his boys die. When he finished, his mother was crying. Not with sadness, but with something else. Relief, pride, understanding. "I always wondered," she whispered. "They told us he died a hero, but they never said how. They never said what he did." She picked up the letter, read her father's words for the first time. He was just like Grandpa, always thinking, always calculating. "He changed the war, Mom, saved 1,200 lives, and nobody ever told us." She looked at Michael, her son, in marine dress blues, and saw her father in his eyes. "Then we'll tell them. We'll make sure everyone knows." And they did. Michael Mercer spent the next 20 years collecting every document, every after-action report, every scrap of evidence about Thomas Mercer's tactics. He gave speeches at military academies. He wrote articles for military history journals. He made sure that the name Thomas Mercer appeared wherever armor tactics were discussed. In 2004, when the book The Reverser was published, Michael wrote the foreword. It began with a simple sentence, "My grandfather was called a coward, but cowards don't save 1,200 lives." The book became required reading at West Point. Fort Knox named a building after him. The French village of Saint-Laurent-sur-Mer made him an honorary citizen posthumously. But the legacy that mattered most was simpler than that. Every year on June 6th, Michael returns to Normandy. He places a new bottle of bourbon on his grandfather's marker, and he tells the story to anyone who will listen. Because that's what Tommy would have wanted. Not glory, not fame. Just for people to understand that sometimes courage looks different than we expect. Sometimes it sounds like grinding gears in reverse. Sometimes it's the wisdom to know that the bravest thing you can do is refuse to charge forward when backing up will save lives. Thomas Mercer understood that 70 years before anyone else did. And now finally, the world understands it too.